Hello there! You haven't expected me to be so close now, have you? It's usually that I'm over there, however the occasion for me being so close is completely arbitrary. I'm just using this as an opportunity to make this preamble a little longer than it has to be, because I have this box, and as you can see within this box there is a stuff from AliExpress, and this stuff is the second item I have bought from the ad revenue from this channel, so it's kind of a perverse way of saying a reward for my viewers, for you, my dear viewer. Well, I hope you're going to be entertained. This is a Fovno 170mm crankset, which is a beautiful CNC work, and I've been eyeing one for some time now, but I just didn't have the opportunity to get one, but it's here, so let's take a peek. Alright, so this is the box with the item we are going to be discussing today, and let me state one thing clearly: this is not a virginary unboxing, because one, this is the umpteenth take of this video, because I am always, unhappy with what I'm recording, and two, I have already opened the box anyway, and I've done unspeakable things to the contents. Anyhow, the items I have purchased are this 38-tooth GXP mount direct mount chainring, which is a knockoff of SRAM, and there is nothing more interesting to say about this other than, well, it's a Chinese knockoff chainring, so it obviously works because all of them actually work. So we're not going to be discussing it today. What I have also purchased is this 104mm 4-arm direct mount, or compatible with the direct mount GXP SRAM pattern of mounting direct mount chainrings, which was a mouthful. 404mm chainrings, which I have, quite a sizable collection of. Unfortunately, there are no bosses for the 64mm, so no 2x10 or 2x11 for you. Anyhow, I have bought one of these, which we're not going to be discussing today, because this is the main attraction of the freak show. What you get in the box is a set of stickers, a pretty simple manual which tells you how to mount this chainring or this crankset to a bottom bracket, compatible with 73, 68 and 2 press fit bottom brackets. So nothing really interesting about that, but you get the most basic information, so that's a good thing. This is the main attraction. This is the crankset I have purchased. Now, this is my checklist, so let's go through all the pieces or all the points here, and let's discuss them. I have obviously bought the orange color, and unfortunately the color isn't as intense as it is on the pictures on AliExpress, because while this was supposed to be orange, it's much closer to a copper color, because orange, I hope the camera is going to pick it up, is this one here. And this one, while it is technically orange, it's, as I said, much closer to a copper color. However, what's interesting about this is that the machining here, or the surface, isn't really sandblasted in this finish you could see on the spider here, because you can see this is a pretty matte finish of the entire thing. This one is more polished, so essentially it means that this is a bit higher quality product, because usually the Chinese are trying to hide the blemishes in the finish by sandblasting or bed blasting the entire item with something that simply hides the blemishes. It hasn't been done here, and anodizing something to have this I wouldn't say a glossy color, but it's much smoother color, means that there was much more care being taken when manufacturing this item. However, when it comes to the color, it is orange, but it is not as intense as this kind of orange, and not as intense as this kind of orange, which are obviously two different hues of orange anyway, but this isn't really intense, so we have discussed color already. The color is, as I said, much more closer to copper. Now, let's weigh those things and see what we're going to be arriving at. As you can see, the crank arms alone are weighing 541 grams, which is respectable for an aluminum crankset in 170mm length. Now, if we throw in the hardware, this rises to everything to 564 grams. Overall, pretty well respectable when it comes to the aluminum crankset, as I said before. Alright, the weight we're done with. The quality of the machining is pretty high, as I said before. They even managed to make this anodizing on a smooth surface. It wasn't bad blasted. There are no clear visible sharp edges anywhere. Everything seems to be nicely chamfered. There are no, I know, some obvious problems with it. There's some grease here, but this is most likely a residue after pressing in the axle. And as you can see, the axle here is actually mounted on a screw, so I guess we would be able to disassemble this. This is interesting. Which also means that it might be that these arms are manufactured more or less with the same program, and there is only some finishing done to make this interface and interface here for the axle. That's not really relevant. When it comes to the axle diameter and generally speaking the design of the axle, this is a 24mm axle, so 23.92 with this crappy slide rule. So this is 24mm, which is compatible with just about every Shimano compatible crankset out there. This one is meant for 73, 68mm bottom bracket and press fit of the equivalent size. Once again, not an issue here. So here we go. Now, when it comes to the general design of the axle, you can see that there's an Allen head here, which means that this most likely is a screw which we can unscrew and take the axle out, which is an interesting feature, although not pretty useful if you ask me, because, well, with this integrated bottom brackets, that's not really necessary. However, it means that this thing isn't pressed here, it is actually held by the screw, so there's an interference fitment here. This is, well, I say this is good, and if they're using the same interface on this side than on this side, this is pretty good, because as you can see, the interface here, I hope it's visible, and I hope this is going to autofocus. Focus you, machine. So you can see the interface here is chamfered, and it's narrowing towards the end, which means that there's a pretty good resting of the crank arm when it is fitted to the interface. This is extremely good. This is essentially doing what the square tapper was all about, because this is tappering towards the crank arm. So once you torque everything to the spec, all you have to do is take out any play if it's going to be present here, but the crank arm is going to be sitting snugly on the axle. There's not going to be any play, so this is better than, well, quite a few race face cranksets from the yesteryear, which were using their own proprietary interface, which wasn't chamfered or tapered in any way, and it would simply at some point get itself loose. So once again, this is a really good thing, and I'm going to check it here under compatibility, or maybe arrangement. Alright, there you go. Arrangement. When it comes to compatibility, it's obviously compatible with typical pedals. This one is, by the way, 170 millimeters. Unfortunately, 175mm version, which I would prefer, wasn't really available. So, well, sucks to be me, really. Anyhow, when it comes to compatibility, as I said before, this is a 24mm axle, so it is as compatible as you can get. It's even marked here. And the width is also stated. That's pretty good. Alright, and now let's talk about the mount, which is how are you going to attach the crank arm to the axle or the spindle on the other side. And this crankset is using an inferior interface or inferior arrangement, because I'm always saying that Shimano makes the best cranksets because you are adjusting the bearing preload with a separate mechanism to mounting or securing the crank arm onto the axle. Essentially, when it comes to the Shimano crankset, you are attaching the crank arm using this little plastic bolt in order to make the distance between the crank arms correct and preload the bearings of the bottom bracket correctly. And once you have that set, you start simply using the pinch bolt to attach or secure the crank arm onto the axle. Unfortunately, this design is using a single bolt, which is pretty common on most cranksets out there. at least non-Shimano, which you are using a 8mm Allen, or like this one, 8mm, damn, I'm good. You are using an 8mm Allen, and I am pretty clumsy, I'm sorry. You are using 8mm Allen, and you are then securing the crank arm onto the axle by simply tightening it, and since this interface here is tapered, you are securing it pretty securely. However, point being that there is only one arrangement when this makes sense, and once you are torquing this correctly, you are setting the preload of the bearings to the value that was set by the machining of the crank arm, or the spindle, or the crank, or just about everything. Point being that this distance isn't really adjustable with means different than using some sort of shims or some sort of mechanism like that. They are even shipping some shims for the axle and the weavy spacer to take out the play. Anyway, so this is the package here. There are also the 3 bolts to mount the chainring here. Point being, if your frame is out of spec for whatever reason, or you are not going to mount this correctly, then you're going to either have a play here, or you're going to have some sort of over-tightened bearings. This isn't something that breaks the crankset or makes it some sort of inferior item, but this is definitely something that makes the installation a little bit more involved when it comes to the Shimano cranksets. Oh, and if you haven't noticed yet, there's obviously a self-extracting bolt on this side. And I'm going to make a nitpick now. The bolts that were shipped with the crankset are using a really teeny tiny Allen head here instead of using a Torx, which means that you're going to attach this once and then never again, because you're going to strip the bolt. I'm not going to be using these. These are failure. Avoid them as you possibly can. If necessary, use a chainring. No, the disc rotor for 6-bolt mount. This one is going to the bin. This is trash. Don't you think this looks absolutely glorious? Well, I do think so, because I bought them precisely because they look so cool, and I can understand why people like this direct mount chainrings, because they look so clean. There's no bolts or anything sticking out. Anyhow, you can admire the beauty of the crankset. For the sake of presentation, I used the original bolts here because I haven't found any fitting bolts in my heap of bolts. And if you're wondering what you get with the crankset, there are 2 pedal washers, which are using here and here. There you go. There's this chain line modifying washer, and there are some O-rings, which I guess you're using on the axle. I need to read the manual, and there is this weavy washer in order to take out any play. Anyhow, I've got plans for this crankset which are going to be absolutely glorious, or at least that's what I think, because I always think that my plans are absolutely glorious. However, for now, this is going to get stalled because I need to make some arrangements. And I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're going to tune for the next installment of whatever I'm going to do.